is Mary Louise Ashbourne, and I've lived all my life in a little community called Weston, which of course is now part of Toronto. And I'm going to talk today a bit about my husband Howard, how we met, and his family. So now, both Howard and I were university students and working at Kodak in the summer. And Howard phoned and asked if I'd like to go out. Of course I would. And I said, well, at risk of sounding a little bit off, I'd really love to go down to Maple Leaf Gardens because there's a big political rally on tonight, and the Liberals are at the end of the campaign in 1953, and Mr. Sanderon will be there, and Mr. Pearson will be there, and they're all going to be giving speeches, and I'd just love to go. And so off we went, enjoyed it immensely. He never told me that at that very election, his father was running for election in Newfoundland, and his riding was Grand Falls, Green Bay, Labrador. And so that was he was running in that riding as a Liberal. But he must have been thinking that maybe we had a little more in common that might appear on the surface. Now, in the Depression years, times were miserable in Newfoundland. Very, very poor. Very poor. And everybody suffered. All businesses suffered and people suffered. However, that ended in 1933 when Newfoundland went bankrupt. And it was a colony, and Britain had to take over the management, and they called it a commission of government. No elections, just governed from England. This sounds a little bit like what we went through before 1834. When they got back on their feet enough and to be able to run their own affairs, which I would suspect was 38 or 39, then and held elections. And that's when Father Tom ran for office as an MPP, is what we would say, I guess, and was in the government from that time on. And then came the war, and the war years were good down in Newfoundland because there were lots of jobs and there were a number of American bases, and the Americans were very lavish with what they spent out in the community. And so when they got talking about the possibility of Newfoundland government or Newfoundland joining with either they could run their own affairs or they could join with Canada, and a lot of them thought that it would be very nice to join with the United States. They had a lot of relatives and family or friends that had gone to the States. They felt more kinship with that family or those relatives, the people they knew, than they did with the Canadians. They really didn't know very much about Canada. So they called what they Newfoundland National Convention. This was an election, and there were 45 members from 38 districts, and my father-in-law was one of those who was elected for Green Bay, Grand Falls, Green Bay. But Joey Smallwood had this dream of the Confederation, and he pushed it. And there were a lot of people then that got on the bandwagon, thought perhaps this maybe was a way to go. And one of those was my father-in-law. He was a supporter. But anyway, there was a delegation that went up to Ottawa in 1946, and they were talking about negotiating what kind of terms would Canada offer to Newfoundland. And at first, the Canadians were very coy about it and very shy about it and didn't want to commit themselves very much. And it took a lot of persuasion and a lot of time up there in Ottawa, but eventually they came around to the idea that this maybe was a possibility. But my father-in-law was part of that delegation that went, and out of it came Confederation. So I truly believe that he fits the qualifications of a father of Confederation. So this was one of the things that I, as a historian, always felt was a rather nice thing to have in the family, was to have our own father of Confederation as my father-in-law. He was a very fine gentleman, was Tom Ashbourne. And he was a member for the election in 1949, the first election when they elected members to the House in Ottawa. And he was, his last election, he was until 1958.